Behind the Shades.
Physically, I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico right now, but I'm a transformative and spiritual life coach and shamanic practitioner. My website is aclearmind.com. I'm also on Instagram, and you can find me at GNS Thoughts, GN's Thoughts. So, because our reality is made up with our thoughts and what we're thinking in the moment, every moment that exists. So that's where you can find me. I do a lot of group work, personal work, online, in person, a lot of different things, but that's not what I always was. I transitioned into this profession. I was in the soccer industry for a long time and owned an indoor soccer arena, coached soccer. So I work with athletes. That's kind of my ideal situation, is to blend the work I've done as a transformative life coach and shamanism into working with soccer players, especially, but I work with anybody really. And I love working with parents and love working with teenagers as well. So, the journey has just kind of taken me to where I am today. It's been quite a journey.
Perfect. So, from the beginning of your journey, you mentioned soccer. How did you get involved in that, and how did you ultimately decide to transition from that to what you're doing today?
Well, I got into soccer. I mean, it's in my blood. I'm half Brazilian and half Egyptian, and as you know, the Brazilians that's in the culture. And I grew up. I was born in Brazil, but grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And I still remember the phone call when I was 6 years old. My best friend's dad called me and said he was going to make a soccer team, and asked me if I wanted to be on it. So that was kind of my beginning journey of soccer, although it was always there culturally. And eventually, played soccer, started coaching soccer, and opened up this indoor soccer arena that was sitting empty for a few years, and that I had played there in high school and a little bit in college. And best advice my dad gave me, because I knew I wanted to run a business, but I didn't know what. He said, well, if you blend your hobby with a business, you will love what you're doing. And I said, well, my friends and I have been talking about reopening this old indoor arena. And then boom, we went and did it. And it just kind of was totally divine timing. The universe was just welcoming this to happen. And it was really amazing. And the community got behind it. And just, it was in perfect alignment. So, was coaching soccer. I was in my early 20s and coaching soccer and running this indoor. And then eventually I met my future wife. And I remember she came in, she's never played soccer before, was decided to join this soccer team with some friends of hers. And then this spunky little 7-year-old girl came with her. And I was just drawn to both of them, just really energetically. It wasn't anything physical at all. It was like just something inside me said, I'm supposed to be in their lives. There's something about these two. And so I started chatting it up with her daughter, who's now my daughter, but her name is Ryan. And I just really liked her energy. And then eventually started talking to her mom, and one thing led to another, and got married. So, and that's when the journey really began, with learning a lot about myself. I was coaching a very high level youth soccer team at the time. We were one of the best teams in the country, in the US, top 10 in the country. And, it was a lot of traveling and I was coaching these boys to really push their limits and to instill discipline in them and intensity and just so much focus. And, I had never raised a child before. And so, here I am then thrust into not just one relationship, but two relationships, because there was the relationship with her mom, but then of course the relationship with her as well. And that's when I really started to learn. For me, I was always looking forward to being a father, and I was doing such a good job being a coach. I felt, well, I was having results as well. But I said, I can just do this as a parent, same kind of mentality. And boy, was I wrong. There was, I learned a lot of lessons along the way, because, I saw this young girl who was being mothered by a single mom. Ryan's dad had passed away when she was 2 years old. And so, here I was, all of a sudden the dad, there was no other father in her life. And so I said, okay, I was kind of observing, and that was my strength of a coach, of like seeing what my players needed most. And what I saw was like, oh, she needs discipline, she needs to be able to focus. And so I was doing that. And then, when it was well received at the beginning, and then all of a sudden she got more comfortable with me, and then it wasn't so well received, and she has a warrior spirit. And she, wasn't afraid, even at a young age, to kind of speak her mind. And for me, if my players ever did that, then of course I would speak my mind and, make them run or something. Obviously I didn't make her run, but, I would kind of push back. And we had this kind of like back and forth intensity relationship over the next few years, where there was a lot of love, but then there was also, some conflict. And I tried to adjust, and, was trying to learn how to be a better parent, and read books and was implementing them, because my personality is I want to be the best version of me in all categories that come into my life. So whether it's being a coach, a business owner, a parent, whatever. So, I was learning this stuff, and kind of fast forward a few years, she kind of went through a real dark night of the soul, and came out, just a lot of stuff came out about abuse from the past. And she grew up the first part of her life in East Texas, and just in the society there, the culture there where she was from, there's just a lot of tragedy, a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse. And I didn't know this stuff. And even her mom at the time didn't know quite the extent of this. And, there was just a lot of friction going on in the house. And her mom and I had a biological son, and that kind of added to the intensity of the experience, because then, the attention wasn't just on her anymore. So she was having to kind of like maneuver through, we were all maneuvering through a new experience, having, a new child, and they were 13 years apart. So she was having to kind of deal with like us trying to raise a baby who wasn't sleeping. And then she was going through a really tough time as an adolescent. And, I knew I have a background in counseling. I have a master's in counseling. So, luckily we had her in therapy, because I could start to see that she needed some very early on. So she was with a great therapist, and we all went in, and she was telling us about some things from her past that we didn't know. And, so we all had to adjust to this new information of different trauma that she was experiencing, or that she had experienced as a child. And, it was very hard for us. So we were dealing, with a lot of emotional stuff coming up from her. And then our son wasn't sleeping. It was just a really intense time in our family. And she eventually left the house. She just basically, it was too much for her to handle emotionally. And we knew, we did a lot of personal work. We became life coaches, and we're working with a coach ourselves. And we kind of knew that we just had to let her go. And she was luckily she was out of the house, kind of bouncing around different places. And, we still paid for her phone and kept her room open and said, "You're welcome to come back whenever." And luckily she was still open to going to therapy, and she transferred to a new therapist because her old therapist retired. And that was kind of the biggest lesson that I learned, was through that therapist. And it was a DBT therapist. And so there was parental involvement. So her mom would go to the parent meetings, and then, we would go to family therapy, and then Ryan had her own therapy. And probably the biggest lesson, and I spread this to as many people as I can in my work, whether it's a relationship with a child or with a partner of some sort, or really anywhere. I started using this even in my business to kind of help soccer players chill out when they're really heated. And that's the power of validation. And, we went to family therapy, and her therapist gave us a list of invalidating statements. And she said, okay, go ahead and read these and mark off whichever ones that you've either heard or that you've said. And I was going down the list, and I was like, oh my goodness, and I realized how much I was invalidating her experience. And, it can be anywhere from things like, oh, don't feel that way, or you're making a big deal out of nothing, or, you're being so dramatic. And there's so many simple things sometimes, that we say to anybody, especially children, because, we don't want to deal with their emotions, or we want them to change their emotions. And so then we say these things, right? Because really we're uncomfortable.
And one thing, Gabe, that I will add to what you just said is you mentioned invalidating how they feel. And I think many times what we do as not only as people, right, but as parents, we're a little bit more dismissive of our children's situation, their experiences and their feelings, because we're the protectors, right? We're the providers. We're like, oh, you're not really feeling that because this is how the situation is. Or we may look at them and say that, or in our mind, we think they're too young to be experiencing these things, or to understand that this is what they're really going through. So when you were told and you were presented with invalidating terms, and you had to understand, and then you came to the realization like, I am saying some of these things. I am invalidating her experience. How was that for you, realizing that was something that you were a part of, or at the very least contributing to?
Mm-hmm. I mean, at first, I think this is a normal response. I felt a lot of shame, about how I was communicating with her. And there was a really big moment where all of a sudden, some things that she had said for a while, for maybe a year or two, really stuck to me, that she was right. And she used to say, when we would argue, she would say, "You're not listening to me." And that is the key. That's right there, is invalidating, right? It's like, this child is telling me I'm not listening to her. And my response at the time was like, no, I'm listening to the words that, I'm listening to you. I'm just not telling you what you want to hear, So, I think whenever we have these big kind of aha moments, it can be hit with like shame and how we used to be, but then, that quickly moved forward into, okay, I'm going to get better at this. Because, again, I'm all about mastery for myself and wanting to be the best version of me. So, I had to really learn then how to change my language, which, in order to do that, you have to be aware of the situation. You have to prepare yourself, essentially, like, okay, hey, when things get heated, I'm going to validate her feelings and, say, okay, yes, I understand you feel that way, that was a really big moment in my life. And that has really changed the whole outlook on how I communicate with people, especially with my son, and to validate him, because we're never wrong about how we feel. And I think so many times parents especially be like, no, I mean, you shouldn't feel that way, but people do, especially when it comes to, if somebody, for me, I had some really challenging moments in my childhood. So, because of that, I grew and I became very resilient. So then I was just assuming that everyone else should feel the same, like, well, no, your life is easy compared to what I had to deal with,
So, Gabe, when you started to look at what you went through as a child, and then you're realizing what your stepdaughter is going through, and by extension, your biological son is going through, and you did something there that I want to highlight on because you work with people, I work with people, and we've probably seen this so many times, regardless of the different backgrounds they have, the cultures, religion, whatever, is they begin to compare. Your problem is not really a problem because I went through something worse. Your upbringing is not really that bad because I went through something worse. Your pain is not really that pain because you know what? I know someone who went through that 10 times over. That's another way to invalidate. One thing we have to understand, and you highlighted this and you touched on this, is Gabe's struggle is his own struggle, right? Maybe you don't have the tools to go through it, but maybe I do. I shouldn't shame you by comparing you to what I've gone through. I should provide the tools and say, you know, Gabe, I went through something similar. Here is how I handle it. Or Gabe, I know someone that went through something that you went through. Here's how they dealt with it. They had a therapist, they had a coach, they had a mentor, they had a support system. How were some of those steps that you were able to take to change the way you were interacting with your stepdaughter that ultimately improved your relationship to what it is today?
Yeah, it became much more about just growing in empathy for her experience, and especially learning about the trauma that she went through. Then all of a sudden I was like, oh man, Gabe, like she did go through a lot. Yeah, you went through a lot, but she went through a lot as well, and stuff that I didn't have to go through. I went through some other stuff, which was also traumatic. So, that anytime we build empathy for somebody, for their experience, and compassion for them, it really can help the dynamic of the relationship, and still, and she's now an adult, so we're going to have a different relationship now anyway. So, but we can't just have so much compassion to where we parent out of guilt either, and just be like, no, they had a hard life. I'm not gonna, push them too much, so it's finding this delicate blend and balance of validating their experience and their feelings and their emotions, but also still being a parent, and like I said, as an adult, I'm going to parent her different, and she's out of the house, she's doing her own thing. But with my son, who's about to turn 10, it's that blend of, validating the experience. I understand you feel that way, and I appreciate you still speaking to me kindly. I'm just using that as an example, so it's like that's the nice little sandwich, is like validating, using the word and then still speaking, like to instill like some sort of respect or discipline with their words as well. So that was like one of the biggest things that I've learned out there is to have that blend of, not just being like, okay, I understand you feel that way, and that's it, and I'll clean up your mess for you, like, things like that.
Were some of the approach and behavior that you demonstrated something that you saw in your childhood growing up?
No.
So my next
Not at
question would be, how did you learn to behave that way then? Or where did you see it happen?
As far as like the validating and all that, I mean, it just learned it from the therapist and just from reading and listening to different things. I was parented by baby boomers who were from a different generation, and it was much more like, I'm the parent, you're the child, you're going to listen to me. And that just, it's not ideal, because then it becomes like either you get a super combative child, or somebody like me who's just becomes very agreeable to everything and then has loose boundaries. So yeah, I had to just kind of learn through therapists and learn through watching videos and different things, and to have that blend of the validation with still like teaching discipline and teaching structure, because it is possible, and And because kids, they push boundaries from day one. They know if I cry, I'm going to get this, and if I scream and my parents cave and I get this, then I'm going to keep screaming, and to get what I want. So, it's such a tough balance as a parent to, again, all of it to validate, but then to push your child. And if they, as far as like, getting them to do their homework, but not making it a big scene and not making it, very dramatic and being over the top and authoritative, but not laissez-faire either. So it's this balance of like, the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, allowing them to be themselves, but also instilling structure. And, it's a constant for me. It's like something I'm constantly trying to be aware of. Because kids do need to be pushed out of their comfort zone, because if they just want to, sit at home and play video games all day, it's very likely they're going to do that, most kids with their personalities. But if you get them the structure, like, hey, when we come home, no, it's homework time first, it's not relaxing first. Like, let's get our work done and then you can relax, and just instilling that's just kind of the expectation, but do it in a way where, I understand you had a long day and that you're tired. And it's really best to do this, because if you start playing video games now, or you start watching TV now, it's hard to move your energy into one of like trying to be more determined into completing tasks.
It's something that we all have gone through, and I'm pretty sure you've heard it. I know I've heard it. And to everyone listening, you've heard this too. Don't cry before I give you something to cry for. That seems to be the slogan for baby boomer parents who are very, as you said, right? It's, I'm the parent, I'm the child, I'm the adult, you're the baby. And many of them carry that forward until they die. They will always look at you as the child. You can be 20, you can be 30, you can be 50 years old. They can be living in your house and they still look at you as the child. I grew up without my mother and my father. And that experience, in hindsight, looking back now, what it did is it didn't give me a sense of respect and honor for people based on their title. For example, some people say, well, they're my mom and dad. They can literally do whatever they want, and I'm still going to attribute a certain level of respect and love to them, where I didn't have that. I looked at it as, hey, they weren't around. I didn't have that earlier on. My respect and love was given based on behavior, meaning that the people that were good to me, I was good back, and I loved them for being good. The people that I was told that I have to love, not based on their behavior, because of their title, a priest, a pastor, a police officer, a firefighter, the government, a politician. I didn't have that same understanding. And growing up, and even till this day, Gabe, to be very honest with you, it still confuses me, especially when I read in the news or if I read an article and I'm like, mother and father abuse their children. And some people are like, oh my God, I can't believe the parents did that. I hope the child can forgive them and still love them. Where I'm, on the other hand, I'm like, no, there's a level of trust broken. There was protection broken. They should be treated as if someone down the street did that, and even more so because of their position of power and authority over that child is even more so they bear a higher level of responsibility and accountability. When you decided to have your own son, as well as now you're a stepfather and you're a father, but overall you're a father to two people, were you in the process of holding yourself to a higher standard, knowing what you went through as a child with your own trauma?
Yeah, I was always looking forward to being a father and having a relationship with a biological child. And it was something that I carried when I was very young, that I was like, and especially to be a son, or to have a son, and, to have a relationship, I think deep down, without knowing it, unconsciously, I knew it was going to be a way to heal my childhood. because I suffered trauma and abuse and abandonment and other traumatic situations, and felt unloved, even though my parents, I knew they loved me, but I also, you can know they love you, but still feel unloved at times, and so I think unconsciously I knew it was going to be a way for me to help heal my childhood, was to have a son of my own, and to raise him from birth, because there's something different when you all of a sudden meet a 7-year-old and you're their parent versus from day one. You just have a different type of relationship, and that's something else that I learned was that I, in hindsight, would have done differently with Ryan, was to really establish a deeper relationship with her, and have like a girl father-daughter time, more than we had when she was younger, especially. So having my son and really trying to give him the childhood and be the parent to him that I wish I would have had is what's really helped me heal my childhood wounds, to give him what I lacked, and not out of any type of guilt or anything, but just to be present with him and to be there for him and to support him and be his cheerleader with the things that he's doing, and to just be by his side, and for him to always to feel, to know that he's loved, but also to feel that he's loved by me. And that's been really, really powerful to help me on my healing journey. And it's also really helped me to establish a deeper relationship with my dad as well, because I was putting so much energy into him and then not so much with my dad, and I'm like, well, my dad and I physically were in different countries for most of my childhood, most of my life, really, until the last like 2 or 3 years, where he's been here in Albuquerque with me. So it's really propelled me to establish a deeper relationship and spend more time with him as well, in both of those angles, to be a father and to still be blessed that I have my father still with me. So to be a father and a son still at my age has been really, really just, I have so much gratitude to be able to have that, because it has really helped me heal deeply.
What is the type of childhood that you wanted, and how are you helping your son to get that type of childhood that he would want, and maybe that you'd want for him to be successful?
I think, I think any child would want this, but is to have their parents be as present as possible with them. Parents, they have to work, right? They have to be out and do things. So, it's not about being with the child 24/7, but it's, if you're there, for 2 hours a day, because, you're at work, they're at school, and, you're only there for before school and after school and dinner and bedtime, that's it. But it's to be present and to do the things that they want to do. I think so many times children are just thrust into what the parents want to do a lot of times, and it's this balance, because, parents need to be able to do adult stuff, with their children, and it's not always about, what the child wants. But, when my son, if he wants to do something, if he wants to play Legos, I will sit down and play Legos, and I put my phone, and I keep my phone in the other room, because now, we didn't have this, growing up, or I didn't have this growing up, where my parents had cell phones. For one part of my childhood, like, we didn't even have a phone in the house, let alone a cell phone. So, there are so many more distractions nowadays than there were 10, 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So, for me, it was looking back now at my childhood, what would have helped is to be at least in the same city as both of my parents at the same time, which didn't happen from the time I was about 5 or 6. but it was to, be loved no matter what I wanted to do and be accepted for who I was and what I was. And, this goes back to that blend of, kind of pushing your children, but also accepting for who they are. Is like, we put so many expectations and standards as parents for our kids to succeed in school and academically, and we want them to be a certain thing, and that puts pressure on kids, like parents, and you've probably heard this, I just want you to be happy, but there comes along with it is like, I want you to be happy, and maybe this is just my projection and how I felt, when I was growing up, is I want you to be happy, but this is how I want you to be happy, as if you do this, so there it's just more, it's that all goes down to unconditional love, right? Like, not to compare a child to somebody else, one of their peers. Like, why can't you be more like this, this person, which is stuff that I heard, or, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that, so it's again, it's that delicate balance of not letting your child be complacent, loving them unconditionally for who they are, but also, giving them that push to be excellent and to drive a little bit more, because you have to have that drive in life. You can't just be complacent.
I love you as long as you listen to me. I want you to be happy, right? I want you to be happy as long as you do what I say.
Yeah.
Conditions.
Exactly.
There's times where I believe many people, I'm not going to say most because I want to be positive today, right? I believe many people, their love is conditional.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it comes to parents, right? I can understand if it's someone you married, right? I love you as long as you don't physically abuse me. I love you as long as you don't cheat on me, for example, right? I love you as long as I don't want to come home from work one day and the house is gone, right? I can understand in those situations. But when you've created a life, and maybe this is me speaking out of some Walt Disney movie romance comedy, right? Because I don't have children. I would think that if I were to create life and I found someone that I was like, I want you to be the person that helps me create a version of myself and you that's going to enter this world and be better than us. Ultimate parent's dream, right? I would think that it wouldn't matter what that child does outside of breaking the law. That would shake my love, right? If the person worked at McDonald's, I still love you. Does that make you happy? Then I'm happy for you. Is this the type of person you want to date or marry? Do they make you happy? Do they treat you well? Yes. Then I'm happy for you. It's interesting to see sometimes we put our own expectations. Well, I wouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. And that's the way it's going to be. And Gabe, when you're raising your son now, how much of yourself do you see in your son as you're raising him?
I mean, children are mirrors of their parents, so, sometimes I see stuff from his mom, and sometimes I definitely see stuff from me. I'm like, that's me, and it's the beauty of children is that they can show you what needs to be healed, when my son, he's can be stubborn and impatient with things, and when is that way, I ask myself, is he feeling my energy right now, and what's my energy like, and what is showing me that I need to heal, or if he says something that I typically say, or I'm like, oh my God, that's like he's getting that from me, because parents, based on where they are in their lives at the moment of parenting, they're programming their kids all the time by how they move, by how they talk to themselves or to others, and kids absorb that and they will become that way. I mean, I could see it in myself from my parents, and I definitely see it through him, and I see it even through my daughter Ryan, even though I missed the first 6 or 7 years of her life. that now as an adult, I can see certain things in her from me, and a lot of good things too. It's not just all the bad things, so yeah, 100%. Like that's the job of children, is to be a mirror to their parents and show them, give them the opportunity to show them like what still needs to be healed within them. Because children aren't bad. They're not. Nobody's bad. But we all have our wounds. We all have stuff to work through, no matter who you are.
As we close, Gabe, what's some advice that you want to give to the step parents out there, maybe particularly stepfathers, about some of the lessons that you learned as you were continuing your journey with your stepdaughter?
The number one thing, and I think I had it a little bit easier because I wasn't competing with her father. So there's a lot of step parents who have to learn how to navigate through a relationship with the biological parent, and that can be more challenging, I imagine. I didn't have that experience, but I think no matter what, whether you're the parent all of a sudden without a biological parent involved, or whether there is a biological parent also involved, is to establish a relationship first and to really connect with them. And I think for all parents, whether you're a step parent or biological parent, is to, understand that all children are on their own journey in life, and to trust that journey with still showing unconditional love to them and support, even when they make mistakes, and especially when they make mistakes, that's the time to learn. And that's the time that they're going to grow, and not to shame them, to actually, help them learn from those mistakes. That is crucial for all kinds of parenting. But again, for step parenting, it's really establishing a deep relationship, and not just jumping into, super driven discipline mode, if that's who you are, because that's not for everybody. But that was just my personality, because that's how I lived life with my business and with my coaching, my soccer teams. But again, establishing a deep relationship with them and connecting with them on certain things is so powerful and so crucial and so important, because once you do that, then it establishes trust, and then you can slowly start to act more as a parent, because step parenting is not just exactly like parenting at all.